Last time we talked about books that I personally believe are way overhyped on the internet, like on BookTok and BookTube and Bookstagram, and I just don't believe that they deserve the hype that they've been getting. This time, we're going to talk about popular books that I do believe actually deserve the hype that they are getting. So we're not going to waste any time here, and we're going to just jump right into it. The first book that I want to talk about is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is one that I've definitely seen going around the internet frequently and recently. The story of how I came to read this book is a little bit interesting. So I had done a blind book date a couple months ago earlier this year where I ordered a couple books online that were all wrapped up in brown paper, and I had no idea what the book was. I just had a couple words that described what the book was about, and then you choose your book based on that and not based on the cover. I am absolutely guilty of choosing a book based on its cover, so I figured it would be fun to try something that is the antithesis of that, and this was one of the books that I unwrapped, If We Were Villains. As I started reading it, when I went to go add it to my Goodreads profile and track my progress, it actually showed that I had added this as a want to read on Goodreads way back in 2018. I have no idea where I saw it, why it looked interesting to me, but it actually was already on my profile, and I didn't know that, didn't remember it at all, and so that made me even more excited to read it, that it was kind of already on my list even though it was like 6 years ago that I added it, which was really cool. This book is about a group of 7 students that are attending kind of a prestigious art college that is focused specifically on the Shakespearean theater program. But the book itself starts off with our main character, Oliver, actually getting out of jail and talking to this detective, and basically we're sitting on a park bench with them and Oliver's like, all right, I'm ready to tell you the entire story. And then we go back a decade earlier to when they were in their final year of college at this school together. Like I said, they're in a Shakespearean program. The way that this author weaves in Shakespearean dialogue into these characters' normal dialogues and into her writing in general is so brilliant to me. She does such a good job at incorporating all of the Shakespeare stuff, and I personally learned more about Shakespeare, read more of Shakespeare than I ever had in my entire life in this one book. It felt like he was actually a character in the book itself, and you kind of get a love letter to all of his writings and all of his plays, and I have to imagine that the author actually really enjoys Shakespeare and reading Shakespeare because it just came through so strongly, and I think it was done really well and not in a way that was ever annoying or pretentious, but it focuses on these 7 characters as they're going through this last year of college studying Shakespeare, and a tragedy happens. A Shakespearean tragedy happens to one of the characters, and suddenly we are down from 7 to 6. It's kind of framed as a mystery book trying to solve the mystery of how this one character died and why they died, but even more than a mystery, this just feels like an excellent character study on how people deal with tragedy and how it affects their relationships with the people that are closest to them. All of these characters come from significantly different backgrounds, ethnicities, demographics in general, even just geographical locations. They are scattered across the globe, and they come together and they form these bonds that are tighter than siblings, than family. It's all kind of like they are a soulmate group of friends here. Suddenly they have to deal with something that is bigger than them. It's horrific, it's tragic, and it starts to kind of pull at the frayed edges of the tapestries of their friendships, and the way that everything unravels from there, I was really blown away with the writing. It felt so personal to the author, but she also makes it really personal to the reader. She finds ways for you to have empathy and compassion for these characters. I was feeling the stress and the pain that they were going to when they were making mistakes and making dumb decisions. I was feeling the frustration that somebody who loves someone else would feel when they're making these mistakes. I finished the book and just was really surprised that I liked it so much, because I think it's a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but you can't dispute good writing. This is just good writing in my opinion. It actually kind of reminded me of the Atlas 6 a little bit, which is a book that I included in my overhyped books. Atlas 6 is also about a group of people that come together and form these bonds through a program or some sort of plot mechanism that forces them to work together. Obviously, there's the magical element of that, which is something you can't compare to this book, but I think in Atlas 6, Olive Blake really tried to do a character study and do a relationship study and have this beautiful, poetic, emotional writing all throughout the book, and it just didn't hit for me there. This, I think, is an example of that type of writing style done really, really well. And I'm glad that this is getting a lot of hype recently because I never saw anything about it. I don't even know where I saw it in 2018 to add it to my Goodreads list, and I got it from a blind book date, hadn't seen anything about it earlier. Actually, as I was just doing some research for fall reads and some dark academia reads, this one is everywhere, and I know a lot of people are reading it right now, and if they're not reading it, this is the perfect time to read it. It's October, it's autumnal, we're going back to school, we've got fall break and stuff, and it just feels like you should read this book for sure. It 100% deserves the hype that it gets. Moving on to one that I know is beloved by many, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the only Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I have read so far. I've heard really, really good things about her other books as well, but so far this is still the only one that I've read, and I got it as a book of the month because I was seeing all of the hype that it was getting. I know that people freaked out about this book, and I kind of just wanted to know like what was up. So this book follows our main characters Evelyn and Monique. We pick up and we are present day. Evelyn is an elderly woman. She's a Hollywood actress that has had an extremely successful career and is now kind of living out the rest of her days in her swanky apartment. She's a little bit reclusive, but she has this past that is riddled with relationships and husbands that has always been in the public eye that people have always been super curious about, and she's been very tight-lipped about the entire thing. Until now, when she asks Monique, who is a reporter, to come to her house, and again, she's ready to tell you the entire story of her career, of her relationships, and how she made it to where she is now. Evelyn is really our main character, and we are following her over decades of her life. We see her as she is a very, very young girl. She's starting out in Hollywood. She's trying to find fame and make a name for herself. And then we see her progression in movies and stardom and how it changes her, how it affects her, how she sees herself, what she believes to be right and wrong and true and false, and it's really, really interesting. It feels like a very realistic depiction of fame and Hollywood. Obviously, I wouldn't actually know what a realistic depiction of fame and Hollywood is, but if I had to guess, this would feel really, really close to that. I think it was just done super, super well, especially the parts where it talks about her 7 husbands. That's mostly what the book is really focusing on, is Evelyn, but also her relationships and how they've contributed to where she is today. And of course, there's like a really fun twist at the end where she talks about her current relationship, and I just think it was written really, really well. I think the main thing that I like about this book, though, is just your relationship with the character of Evelyn. It is another case where you just feel so much compassion for her. She really goes through some tough things in the spotlight, of course, but also beforehand as she's trying to get famous. There are some things that are a tough read. You just want to see Evelyn win. You just want to see her have a happy ending. You want to see her make good choices and make the right choices in the end. And sometimes she doesn't always do that, and it's painful and it's gut-wrenching, and you just want to see her succeed. And I think those are some of the best books, when you are so connected to a character that you are feeling everything in the moment as if you were there with them, as if you were actually their friend walking through all of this stuff that they're going through with them. And I think that this book really does that well. Taylor Jenkins Reid really does that well. She makes you connect to her characters. Even if you don't like them the entire book, you're connected to them. You feel compassion for them. And I think that was just executed super well. This one definitely deserves the hype. I love seeing people talk about this. I love the fan art that I've seen of this. I love the fan theories that I've seen of this book. And I just think it's super, super fun. It really does feel like there's something for everyone in this book, even if it's not the typical genre or the typical book that you usually read, I think you should still give it a try because it just feels like a universal thumbs up. Okay, next is one that I read a really long time ago, and there's a lot of things about the plot that I've actually forgotten, but I know that it affected me really deeply while I was reading it, and I liked it so much. Unfortunately, I don't have the dust cover for this because I went through a really weird phase where I thought all books looked better without the jacket covers. I don't know if anybody else went through a phase like this, but I have a bunch of random books where I just like took the covers off, threw them away, and I deeply regret it now. So you still don't know what this book is, but it is Cers by Madeline Miller. Quick poll, is it Cers, Circe, or Cirque? Because I know people that say it all different ways, and I've never been confident on how it is actually said. I've always said Cers in my mind, but I could be wrong. I apologize. For this video, it's going to be Cers. I read this back in 2018 when it was part of Book of the Month, and I was drawn to it because it is a Greek retelling. I've said this before, but I've always been drawn to Greek mythology and Greek retellings. I think it's because I read Percy Jackson as a kid so much and loved that so much. So that was really the reason that I picked this book up initially. And the reason that I'm including it in this list is because I think the writing is really, really beautiful. To be honest, I don't even remember a ton about the plot itself. I know that it follows Circe from the beginning when she realizes she has powers. She's banished to her island, and it takes place over many, many years as she is meeting Greek heroes, Odysseus, she meets Medea, all of these people that we kind of know from Greek mythology, crosses paths with Circe, and she figures out how to use her powers. It's a very female empowerment book, but written in a way that is so beautiful. It is very poetic. It has very, very strong stances on what Circe is going through and what she's experiencing, and I think that it describes Circe's emotions so viscerally. I didn't even really love her as a character. To be honest, I didn't rate this book crazy, crazy high. I know that I super enjoyed it, and I think that it definitely deserves the hype that it's getting, but I'm just being honest with you right now. It's not my favorite book in the world that I've read, but I appreciate it so much for what it was trying to accomplish and what it did accomplish. I think that is a pretty strong mechanism for how I think about books and how I give opinions on them. You can always tell what an author is trying to do, and when they actually don't accomplish that, it feels so awkward and stressful when you're reading the book itself. But when they are able to accomplish it and execute what they set out to do in the beginning of writing their book, it is so satisfying, and it feels so good to go along on that journey as a reader because you just know that the author is really, really proud of what they've done. And I feel that way about Cers. It feels well executed, well written. The story is well crafted. I do remember the story being a little bit slow at times, but it also is a Greek myth retelling. So there's a lot of things that we already know about these characters and how they're supposed to act. And I think she was also trying to be true to the source material and her original inspirations. And Greek heroes are bad dudes. They're not great. And she didn't shy away from that. She did a good job of trying to make it accurate to Greek mythology, but also adding in a little bit of twist of modernism, of feminism, and beautiful, beautiful writing. I am so happy that people love this book so much. I will say that it seems like people love Song of Achilles, her other book, way more than Cers, and I've actually never read that book. My husband has read it, and he kind of said the same thing, where the writing was just so beautiful. The story itself wasn't necessarily something to write home about, but the characters were really fleshed out, and it's just the writing. The prose, the literal prose of both of her books are just gorgeous, and they make me emotional sometimes reading them, and I think she just does such a good job. So Song of Achilles is definitely still on my list, but if Cers is not on yours, you should definitely consider putting it on. The next book that we are going to talk about is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This was 100% a book that I picked up because of the hype train. Everybody was talking about it. I could not escape this book, and I wanted to see what it was all about, and I truly loved it. It follows our two main characters, Iris and Roman, and we're in kind of like a 1930s, 1940s urban fantasy magical realism world. It kind of feels like we're in maybe 1930s New York City or maybe a London, some sort of big city in the 1930s, while there is a supernatural war going on between these gods of the land. Iris and Roman are newspaper reporters who are sent out to the front lines to report on this magical war. This whole time, Iris is working on sending letters to her brother, who she's really close with, who is on the front lines. She has this typewriter where when she types out a letter, she puts it under the door of her wardrobe or any wardrobe that she can find. The letter disappears. Turns out Roman has the sister typewriter to the one that Iris has. The letters go between the two typewriters, and Iris and Roman don't know this. And so they all of a sudden are sending letters back and forth to each other, but they don't know that it's them. Back in the real world, Iris and Roman are kind of professional rivals. They both want a very specific position at this newspaper gazette, and so they're kind of competitive with each other. They're fighting against each other, trying to get this promotion. So they don't necessarily like each other. But then they start talking to each other through this magical typewriter letter delivery system, and they start to fall in love over these letters. And I think that it is so cute and it is so well written, and I love the relationship that blossoms between these two characters over the entire book. It feels kind of like a slow burn romance because it takes them so long to face each other with like, okay, yes, we're talking to each other, we're in love, we're gonna get together. That happens at the end of the book, and man, the tension that builds between the characters, but also us and the story. I was reading this book so fast trying to get to this point, and that to me is the sign of something really, really special when you are just trying to blaze through this book. You are turning pages as quickly as you possibly can to get to that release that you know is coming. And it was so satisfying and so great to read this plot line. I loved it so much. Unfortunately, the second book in this duology was one of my most disappointing books of 2024 so far, but the first book is wonderful, and I do think it deserves the hype that it gets. When it's hyped up as a series though, I can't get on board with that because I really don't think the second book is that good. But the first book, I love this one. I love these characters. You should read it and maybe just like stop a couple pages before the cliffhanger and pretend that it's its own standalone book. All right, we're getting towards the end here. This is a book that I have talked about many times on this channel. I read it earlier this year in May, I think. It is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is one of my favorite books of the entire year so far. I love it so much. It is a fantasy book. It has some Greek and Roman mythology elements in that, which of course I love, but it follows our main character Viz in a world where something called will equates to power. So every person in this world has a certain amount of will in their body that they can cede to other people and give them power by giving them their own will. And that creates this hierarchy in this world. How much will do you cede to other people and how much will do you receive? The more will that you get and the less you give away means the higher up on the totem pole you are. We're talking like the high up political figures. There's not really like a monarchy. It kind of does feel a bit more like a democracy or what maybe ancient Greece would have felt like, but without like one specific political figure. There's a lot of sects in this world of religion and government and military, and within each sect there is a pyramid. There's a hierarchy in it. And if you are at the bottom of the pyramid, you are not getting any will back. You are ceding your will to other people, which means you're basically a slave. You're just in forced labor. You don't get any of your own power. That is a really tough life. Will also equates kind of to magic, the more will that you get, the more power you have in kind of a magical sense. It's kind of confusing the way that I'm explaining it, but it really does start to make sense once you start to read the book. So Viz is our main character. He's like a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy who is an orphan living on the streets, just trying to make money by organized fights and pickpocketing, but he's really smart. He comes across this higher up guy in the government who is looking for somebody to go undercover at this fancy academy in this world where all of the political leaders send their kids to get indoctrinated with the laws of the land and just how the world kind of operates and works. But there's some fishy stuff going on at this school. So this guy that Viz meets sees that he's kind of a nobody. He is nameless and faceless and really smart. So they kind of make a deal for Viz to go undercover at the school and gather information and kind of see what's going on. And as Viz is at this school, he starts to see that there are some serious conspiracy theories going on right now, and things are not all that they seem. There's a lot of sketchy stuff happening, and it is just so interesting. It's so exciting. I think, if I'm being honest, the first maybe like 150 pages were a little bit tough for me to get through because it is so much world building. It is so much foundational information that is very vital towards the end of the book. It's very important and good that we have that, but it was a little bit dry in the beginning and tough for me to get through. But there was a point, I think at around 150 pages, where an event happens, and basically from that point on, I was absolutely hooked. I smashed through this book. It's a big boy. This is a thick boy. This is 600 pages, but he's also very tall, and the words are pretty tiny. So it took me only a couple days to get through that back half of the book because it was so exciting. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, and the cliffhanger that it ends on, oh my gosh, I am dying for book 2 right now. This one deserves all the hype that it's getting, but I also think that it is very underhyped. This needs more hype. It needs to get in front of more people, especially if you are a fantasy reader. But even if you're not a fantasy reader, the characters are so good, and I think the writing is so strong, and the world building is incredible, and everybody should read this. I don't care what genres you typically read. Everybody should read this. All right, and the last book that I think really deserves all the hype that it's gotten is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I read this book at the end of 2023, and I really wish that I had read it in 2024 because I think this would have been my favorite book of the year. I don't think I've read anything that's topped this yet. It's so beautiful. This follows our main character, Sam, and his friends as they meet, I think in the late 90s at college in Massachusetts, and they build a video game together. And this video game fully takes off. It gets so popular. They suddenly make so much money as like 23, 24, 25-year-olds. They are suddenly millionaires, extremely successful, and trying to deal with this crazy amount of fame that they have garnered in their own community. And we follow these characters for like 30 years as they build a company together that makes video games, as they try to chase the success of their first video game and come out with something that is better and can kind of top that, as they go through some really intense tragedies and difficult things in their relationships that start to pull them apart and then bring them back together again. This is another book that just feels like a character study of these 3 individuals that come from different backgrounds and how they relate to each other and how they go through life's problems together. But it's in the setting of like Silicon Valley, California, video game startup realm, which was really interesting to me. I love video games. I grew up playing video games with my brothers, and I do it a lot now by myself and with my husband, so that was already a draw for me. But even if you don't play video games at all, I think that you can still find so much enjoyment in this. It's just a fascinating setting and a fascinating plot, and then you throw in the fact that you just love these characters and want to see them succeed and do well. There's literally literally a whole section in this book, maybe close to 100 pages, where all of the sudden we are in the video game. It's almost like a Sims game where it's kind of like a lifestyle simulator, and it took me a long time to figure out what was going on, but the way that that is written is so unique and interesting. I've never read anything like that, and within the greater story, it all just ties together in such a cool and fascinating way, and I just love it so much. And I know this one is pretty highly revered across the board by everybody that I know that has read it. If you haven't read it, I definitely think you should give this one a try because it is just awesome. So there you have it. What's interesting about all these books as I was pulling them, which I guess I'm not surprised about because this is something I'm always drawn to, is all of these books really focus hard on the characters. The plots themselves in each of these books is amazing. They're really, really good plots, but you read these books, you keep reading these books because of the characters that are in them and because of the way the authors cause you to have to relate to them. And I'm such a big character reader. I read books for characters and not necessarily for the plots. And so that's kind of a big reason why I love all of these so much, but I didn't even really choose them because of it. It was just kind of a coincidence of all of these books that I love. So give them a try and let me know in the comments if you have any books that you know are totally worth the hype. I am always looking for new recommendations for that. I have a bunch other on my list that I didn't include in this video, so I might do a part 2 to this, and I also might do a part 2 to the books that are overhyped because I definitely have more on that list as well. And I also am looking for books that are underhyped, really good, strong books that maybe don't get a lot of recognition on the internet. So if you have any suggestions there, feel free to drop them in the comments. And once again, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time.